The old ballroom had long stood abandoned on the outskirts of the city. It had once been a center of splendor and luxury, where all the local elite gathered. But after a mysterious fire over 100 years ago, no one ever went there. Locals claimed that music could still be heard in the hall and shadows of dancing figures could still be seen. Lisa, a young journalist, decided to write an article about the forgotten places of the city. The ballroom caught her attention with its legends, especially one. Every century the devil returns to this hall to find a new couple for the last dance, and whoever accepts his invitation will never return. Nonsense. Lisa grinned, studying the old photographs of the hall, but in the back of her mind, she felt that the legend held a strange magic. That evening, as Lisa was going through the archives, she received a call from an unknown number. "Who is it?" she asked, but in response she heard only a strange noise, reminiscent of the rustle of fabrics and a light melody, like an old waltz. Then a voice, deep and soft, said, "Come, we're waiting." Lisa froze, but the call cut off, leaving her puzzled. "This is some kind of joke," she muttered, but something made her glance at her watch. It was exactly 11:11. At that moment, she made up her mind. Tomorrow she would head to the ballroom. The next evening, Lisa made her way to the old building. It looked intimidating, peeling plaster, boarded up windows, and the rusty sign above the entrance still hung, Venus Hall. She stepped inside, lighting her way with a flashlight. The air was cold, smelling musty and dusty. The floor creaked slightly under her feet, and the walls were covered with faded paintings of dancing couples. And suddenly she heard it, the faint, barely discernible melody of a waltz. It sounded as if it were somewhere very close by. "Who is here?" Lisa called out, but the answer was only a muffled thud, as if her heels were touching the floor. Her flashlight flickered, and that's when she saw a shadow. It was the silhouette of a man in an antique tailcoat. He stood in the center of the room, as if waiting for her. "Welcome," he said in a deep voice. Lisa froze, feeling her heart racing. The man held out his hand, his gesture graceful but oddly threatening. "You're here for the dance, aren't you?" he asked, his voice soft but icy. "Who are you?" she asked, trying not to give away her fear. "I am the one who waits every century," he replied, "and you are my chosen one." Lisa took a step back, but the waltz melody intensified, filling the entire space. Her feet felt as if they were stuck to the floor, and she could no longer move. The man stepped closer, his face still in shadow, but his eyes glowed with a scarlet light. "Please don't be afraid," he said, holding out his hand to her. "It's only a dance." Lisa stood as if chained. The man in the old-fashioned tuxedo did not take his eyes off her. His outstretched hands seemed to demand that she take a step toward him. The waltz intensified, the melody sounding from all sides as if a ghost of the past had come to life. "It's just a dream," Lisa whispered, hoping she would wake up soon. But the coldness seeping under her skin was all too real. "Why don't you accept my invitation?" the man asked softly, his voice sounding both charming and threatening. "You came here, didn't you?" "Who are you?" she exhaled. "I am the one who grants eternity," he replied, taking a step closer. "Dance with me and you will know." Lisa felt her body no longer obeying her. Her hand reached up on its own and touched the man's arm. For a moment, a strange feeling of warmth swept over her, but it was immediately replaced by an icy coldness that penetrated to the bone. As soon as she touched him, the hall around her began to change. Gone was the dust, the dilapidation, and the cracked walls. Now it was a hall filled with light. Crystal chandeliers shimmered. The floor was perfectly polished, and dancing couples appeared all around. "What is this?" Lisa whispered, looking around. "This is our world," the man replied, leading her in a waltz. "Whoever accepts the invitation becomes a part of it." Lisa noticed that the faces of the dancing couples seemed unreal. Their features were blurred and their movements were mechanical, like dolls. "Who are all these people?" she asked, feeling fear take hold of her. "They are those who once agreed to dance, as you did," the man replied. "They belong to me now." Lisa tried to pull away, but his grip was strong, as if her hands were glued to him. "Let me go," she screamed. The dance had begun. "It must not be interrupted," he said. "You have made a choice." As they danced, Lisa noticed that the floor beneath their feet began to change. It was no longer mirror-like, but like a black surface, as if they were dancing on the surface of water. In the reflection she saw not herself, but another woman in a ball gown. Her face was contorted with horror and her lips were moving as if she wanted to say something. "Who is she?" Lisa shouted out. The man smiled. "One of the many. She was here before you." Lisa felt panic overwhelm her. "I don't want to be a part of this," she screamed. The man stopped, but didn't let go of her hands. His eyes, glowing scarlet, grew even brighter. "It doesn't matter anymore," he whispered. "You're mine." At that moment Lisa heard whispers. They came from the dancing couples. "Run, run before it's too late," the voices sounded. She looked around and saw that many of the dancers began to slow down. Their bodies began to fade away, turning into smoke. The man turned to Lisa. "You will never escape. Either you finish the dance or you will stay here forever." He let go of her for a moment, but her feet began to sink slowly into the black surface of the floor. "It's your choice," he said. Lisa felt her heart pounding frantically. She took a deep breath and tried to rush toward the doors that appeared at the edge of the hall. Lisa tore toward the doors, feeling the floor beneath her feet come to life. It became viscous, like a thick liquid, and every step was difficult. The dancing couples around her began to disappear one by one, vanishing into thin air, leaving behind barely audible whispers. "You can't leave," a man's voice echoed through the hall. The chandeliers overhead glowed brighter, and their light became blinding. Lisa closed her eyes, but kept moving, orienting herself toward the doors. "I'm not going to be one of you," she shouted, gathering her last bit of strength. But as soon as she approached the doors, they began to disappear, turning into thick shadows. Suddenly, someone's hands grabbed her by the shoulders. It was him, a man in a tailcoat. His eyes glowed red and the smile on his face was frighteningly calm. "You're already part of the dance," he said. "There's no way out here, Lisa." His hands cooled her skin and her legs began to move on their own again. The music of the waltz filled the room again. "Do you think you can run?" His voice was both soft and threatening. "But this place swallows up those who take the first step in the dance." "I don't belong in this place," Lisa shouted, trying to break free from his grip. But his fingers clenched tighter. "Everyone said that," he grinned, "but everyone stayed." The dancing couples appeared again. Their movements became abrupt and chaotic, as if someone were controlling them like marionettes. Their faces were now visible. They were men and women from different times, frozen in an eternal loop. "Who are they?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "Those who once accepted the invitation," the man replied. "Like you." He turned her around, and in the mirror that appeared on the wall, she saw her reflection, but it wasn't her. In the reflection she saw herself in an ancient dress, with empty eyes glowing with scarlet light. "No, that's not me," Lisa screamed, stepping back. "It's you," he said, coming closer. "It's you if you stop dancing." Suddenly one of the whispers broke through the hum of the music. "To the light," the voices said. "Find the light." Lisa looked around and noticed that a small flicker had appeared in the center of the room. It wasn't as bright and intimidating as the chandeliers. It was a warm, living flame. The man noticed her gaze, too. "Don't do it," he said, his voice strained. "That light will destroy everything here." "That's exactly what I want," Lisa whispered. Lisa tore toward the flickering flames, feeling the floor pulling her down harder and harder. The dancing couples tried to block her path, but their movements became slower, as if they were losing strength. The man rushed after her, his footsteps echoing through the hall. "You don't know what you're doing," he shouted. "You will destroy them, but you will destroy yourself too." Lisa wasn't listening anymore. She reached the light and reached out her hand. The flames burned her fingers, but instead of pain, she felt a warmth that spread throughout her body. When her hand fully touched the light, a bright glow engulfed the hall. The music cut off, screams filling the air. The floor beneath her feet began to crack. The lights of the chandeliers went out, and the walls of the hall began to crumble. The man stopped, his figure unsteady, as if he too was part of this world. "You destroyed it," he shouted, but his voice already sounded weaker. Lisa looked at him, but felt no regret. "This place should never have existed," she said. At the last moment, everything around them disappeared in a blinding white light. Lisa woke up on the floor in the ruined hall. The building was abandoned again, covered in dust and cobwebs. There was no trace left of the dancing couples and the man. But one detail remained unchanged. There was a faint mark on her palm, like a burn. It reminded her of the flame she had touched. Leaving the hall, Lisa turned around one last time. She knew the place was empty now, but every time she passed by, she would think that in the shadows outside the window, someone was still watching. Lisa wasn't listening anymore. She reached the light and reached out her hand. The flames burned her fingers, but instead of pain, she felt a warmth that spread throughout her body. When her hand fully touched the light, a bright glow engulfed the hall. The music cut off, screams filling the air. The floor beneath her feet began to crack. The lights of the chandeliers went out, and the walls of the hall began to crumble. The man stopped, his figure unsteady, as if he too was part of this world. "You destroyed it," he shouted, but his voice already sounded weaker. Lisa looked at him, but felt no regret. "This place should never have existed," she said. At the last moment, everything around them disappeared in a blinding white light. Lisa woke up on the floor in the ruined hall. The building was abandoned again, covered in dust and cobwebs. There was no trace left of the dancing couples and the man. But one detail remained unchanged. There was a faint mark on her palm, like a burn. It reminded her of the flame she had touched. Leaving the hall, Lisa turned around one last time. She knew the place was empty now, but every time she passed by, she would think that in the shadows outside the window, someone was still watching. Her gaze fell on the name of the article's author. He was a senior journalist who specialized in urban legends. "I need to talk to him," Lisa decided. Lisa found the journalist, a man named Victor, in a small editorial office. He looked tired but was interested when Lisa mentioned the ballroom. "Were you there?" he asked. Liza nodded, trying not to go into too much detail. "What do you know about the man who was there?" she asked. Victor looked at her carefully. "Legend has it that it's not just a ghost. It's something ancient connected to this place. They say it comes every 100 years to lure new victims." "And what happens to him if the hall is destroyed?" Lisa interrupted. Victor wondered. "If the place is destroyed, it loses its power, but only temporarily. His essence will always find a way to come back if someone starts to dance again." That same night, Lisa returned home, feeling her anxiety rising. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. When she went into her room, the music was playing again. It was the same waltz. This time it sounded louder, like it was playing right behind her back. Lisa turned around and her gaze fell on the mirror. In the reflection, she saw herself in that antique dress again, but this time there was a man in a tailcoat standing next to her. "Did you think this was the end?" he whispered. Lisa screamed, but the music drowned out her voice. When she opened her eyes again, she was not in her room, but in that very hall, only now it was black, without lights or mirrors, and the floor beneath her feet was like a mirror reflecting her frightened face. A man stood across from her, holding out his hand. "You broke the dance, but the flames did not destroy me. Now you must finish it." "I will not return to this dance," she shouted. "Then you will stay here forever," he said with a creepy smile. Lisa felt the floor beneath her feet begin to crack, plunging her into total darkness. The floor beneath Lisa's feet cracked and she felt herself being pulled into the darkness. The man in the tailcoat stood at the edge of this abyss, his figure motionless, but his eyes glowing with scarlet light, watching her every move. "You must make your choice, Lisa," he said. "Dance or eternal emptiness." His voice was soft, but it was threatening. "I've already destroyed this place," she replied, struggling to get to her feet. "Why didn't you disappear?" The man grinned. "You destroyed the hall, but not me. I'm not attached to this place. I'm attached to you." Those words pierced Lisa like an icy dagger. At that moment, she heard the whisper in her mind again, the same whisper that had helped her escape the last time. "Light," he said. "You are the bearer of light. Use it." Lisa remembered the flame she touched when she tried to destroy the hall. Her gaze fell on the burn on her palm, which now glowed with a faint golden light. She raised her hand, and the man in the tailcoat took a step back. "What's that?" he hissed, his composure shaken. "You're afraid, aren't you?" Lisa felt the strength building in her. The man waved his hand, and shadows from the void began to rise, surrounding Lisa. They reached for her, their whispers full of pain and anger. "They hunger for completion," he said. "Only you can give them peace if you obey." "No," she said firmly. "I will give them freedom." Lisa squeezed her palm, focusing on the flame inside her. The light from the burn grew brighter, illuminating the emptiness around her. The shadows began to retreat, letting out eerie screams as if they were being burned by that light. The The man in the tailcoat lunged at her, his face contorted in a vicious grimace. "You can't beat me," he shouted. But Lisa put her hand out in front of her, and the light engulfed him. The man began to scream, his figure beginning to disintegrate like charred cloth. The shadows disappeared with him, and the hall around him turned into a void that kept shrinking until only Lisa and her light remained. "You have chosen your destiny," he whispered one last time before vanishing into thin air. Lisa woke up on the floor of her apartment. Her body was cold and her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She looked around. Everything looked normal. The mirror no longer reflected the strange figures, and the waltz music was gone. She looked at her palm. The burn was gone, but in its place was a thin line that looked like a symbol. Is it really over?" she whispered. A few days passed. Lisa tried to return to her normal life, but sometimes at night she could still hear faint echoes of music. She knew the man in the tuxedo was gone, but his shadow was still present somewhere in the back of her mind. Then one day, as she passed the ruins of the ballroom, she noticed a fire-engraved inscription on the wall. "The dance is not yet over."